Our cave and valley are sitting in the lowest point in a 55 square mile region. That means every inch of water on the surface is 10 times as much down here in the valley. So did anyone try to take a tour with us the last week? Anybody? If you did, you probably found out we were flooded. That happens more often than not, believe it or not. So when Nashville flooded in May of 2010, our water rose 65 feet here in the valley. To give you an idea of what that looks like, you see this tree here by the river, there's a wooden board hanging off of it? That was our water marker when Nashville flooded.
Oh, wow.
Not out of commission for about 90 days. Now, lucky for us, that flood only has a 1% chance of happening every few hundred years, when I do for another in a really, really long time, thank goodness, right? But when the rain gets down in the water, it stirs up sediment, clay, and vegetation, giving the water the green color we see it as today. Now, over time, that sediment and vegetation will settle back down to the bottom. The blue will return of its own accord. Now, scientifically speaking, these blue holes are known as karst windows. They are windows into our underground river system. Now, the word karst, that is just a fancy word for areas with cave-like characteristics dissolvable by water. That includes blue holes, caves, limestone, sinkholes, other features along those descriptions. So if you cut the ground we're standing on in half, it looks like a block of Swiss cheese beneath our feet. Those holes are called karst conduits, and a second river is flowing through those. That is how it got to be called the Lost River. Though the river's been underground for hundreds of years, it was not officially discovered until 1985. We just kept the name Lost because that sounds more exciting than Found River, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so we kept it. So in '85, the property was purchased by Western Kentucky University for their hydrology and geology programs. For my younger audience, hydrology is study of water, geology study of rocks. So we got a lot of that around here. This area is still used by WKU for kind of an outdoor research facility classroom. So Dr. Crawford of the geology department came down here with some students, a measuring stick, a rowboat, and a bottle of dye. They performed a depth reading and dye trace of the 4 blue holes on property and the river. They poured the dye in, looked at topographic maps, found out this river actually starts 5 miles south of here at a place called Cheney's Lake. From there it goes underground and does not resurface till it reaches the natural spring a half mile this way on property. From the spring to the cave, we have the river on the surface and the Lost River 8 feet below. Now, they also found out the 2 rivers meet again as one a couple hundred feet inside the cave mouth to flow to Jennings Creek 4 miles north of here. From Jennings Creek, the river is going to flow to the Barren River, eventually the Green, then the Ohio, then the Mississippi. That goes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's got a pretty long way to go, but I don't recommend swimming in the water any time of the year, because you might notice a bit of a rippling effect going on in the middle. 8 feet below, this Lost River resembles an undertow found in an ocean. So if something or somebody were to go down in there, not likely to see that something or somebody ever again. The only way we can see the Lost River coming up is if we've had a lot of rainfall, because the river on the surface rises, but the river below ground also rises. That's why we see the rippling effect. Normally, nice placid surface. You can't really tell a lot going on, but today, rainfall, boom, there you go. Now, this particular blue hole is only 16 feet deep at its deepest point. It is pretty shallow, but it was originally thought to be bottomless and man-eating. Yeah. Now, that rumor was first started by the Confederate soldiers who came to Bowling Green around September 1861, and for about 6 months, Bowling Green became the Confederate state capital. Now, Kentucky was a border state. We never officially seceded from the Union, but Bowling Green was closer to the southern line than the Union line. The Confederates got down here first. Now, both sides did use our cave as a place to store supplies and munitions. So one day there was a wagon going up the bluff behind the water here when the wagon slipped, causing everything to tumble and crash into the water. Confederates heard the noise, came running, got to the water, only found the driver's hat slowly floating its way down the river toward the cave. Since they had no idea the Lost River was below ground, causing all that turbulence, they called it bottomless and man-eating. It made sense at the time, so the name stuck. About 6 months later, in February of 1862, the Union soldiers came in. Brief skirmish ensued. Confederates were chased south toward Nashville. Now, the Union soldiers were here until about 1864. They, of course, heard the rumors of the bottomless man-eating pit. They thought the Confederates made that up to scare them away from using the water source. So one day, some soldiers were taking a dip in here, cooling off from their hot wool uniforms. 3 guys decided to have a swimming contest to see who could swim to the bottom first and bring up a rock to prove the bottomless pit had a bottom to it. 3 guys dove in, never came back up. Now, When Western Kentucky University got the property in '85, they sent a little robotic camera like a GoPro to the bottom to photograph the conduits. They found a wagon wheel that was dated to the Confederate occupation, but no skeletal remains were found in this water. They could have very easily made that story up to account for desertion or running away, because that was pretty common during the Civil War. So instead of saying Joe and his pals ran home to mom, you could say, hey, we got a bottomless man-eating pit, they went in that and never came back up. So that is why we don't see a lot of wildlife in the water either, because the current is way too strong to house a lot of fish. If you do the trails later, you might see trout and bass in Blue Hole number 3. They're not indigenous. They've been washed in from somewhere further upstream. They will eventually get pushed into the cave with the next flood cycle. They will get trapped, they will die, decompose, and be a food source for cave animals. Circle of life. Now we do see crawdads and bullfrogs around the edges, but not a lot of big fish. So that is how we got to be called the Lost River in the first place. Does anybody have any questions? Cool deal. So we're going to head along the mulch this way if y'all want to